Well, good morning all, and welcome to the latest edition of Elevenses. It's Sunday, it's the 21st of February, and this is, I think it's number 115, actually. As I said before, I'll be absolutely amazed that I've done quite as many of these shows as I have done, but hey ho, here we are with another one. So what have we got for you today? Well, we've got a range of stories. There's an MT-07 sports bike from Yamaha likely to be on the way. The DVSA are talking to anyone who's interested about reducing the size of the bikes used for the A2 test. I'll explain why in a moment. If you thought electric motorcycles were a sort of fringe activity, Eagle Rentals in the US have started out with a zero rental scheme. FEMA's offering some bike buying advice, or bike clothing buying advice, I should say, featuring Paul Valsbury, who has just said good morning. Hello, Paul. Nice to see you. The staggering rise in speeding during lockdown turns out to be rather less than staggering when you actually look at the numbers, and we'll hopefully, if we've got time and if I get the technology working, I'll show you a video that I made some months ago on junctions. So who else is around? Clive's appeared. Hi, Clive. Tony as well. Hello, Tony. And Paul, good morning to you all, and you're all very welcome. So, right, okay, so settle yourself down for the next 25-30 minutes or so for Elevenses. You'll recall that a couple of months back I mentioned that the R6 had reached the end of its natural life. I've just lost the screen picture that I wanted to show you. Let's see if I can get it back up. There it is. Technology, wonderful stuff, eh? Basically, they pulled the plug on the R6 sports bike. Although it was a bestseller for years, the emission standards had taken their toll, and a major engine redesign was necessary to get it to the next standard. And basically, the clock ran out on that particular engine, and with buyers really switching away from the 600 super sport market in droves over the last decade or so, the time finally ran out for this bike. Why? It's a very good question, but I think there's a pretty straightforward reason for it, actually. The R6 was a great bike. The performance of the machine was outstanding, but it was probably the fact that it was too focused as a race bike. It was the very success on the track that probably caused the sales to drift away, with the possible exception of Kawasaki, who always kind of made their track bikes, their super sport bikes, a little less track oriented and a little more road oriented. The Japanese manufacturers became so focused on winning races in the super sport class that what had been, sort of really usable road bike, the original CBR 600F, was a beautiful road bike in my opinion. They ended up as bikes that were sort of compromised generally in the direction of a track, and they were not easy to ride, and they were not particularly nice to ride on anything other than dead smooth tarmac either. Now, you probably know I'm fairly fond of saying that a half decent rider can ride pretty much anything, pretty much anywhere, but frankly, buyers with new bike cash to spend voted with their feet, and it's no big surprise that the adventure bike class was born. It's really a sort of a going back to the all-rounder kind of machine. It's a go anywhere, do anything, ride it and enjoy it kind of bike. You can, if you want to, take these bikes off road, although most people never will, but they're perfectly at home on back roads as they are on city streets, and you can't honestly say to me that commuting on an R6 would be fun. So sales for that kind of bike in the sort of super sport class plummeted. However, that doesn't mean that there are no buyers for the fully fed race style bikes. The R125 and the R3 Both are still good sellers for Yamaha, and of course there's the range-topping R1. So what could fill the gap? Well, the answer is that this latest version of an MT-07, rumour is circulating that you'll be able to get this particular bike in new clothes, and I suspect that's an artist's mock-up, although it's appeared on many different websites. Why would building a sports bike on the MT-07 chassis make sense? Well, for starters, the MT-07 is a parallel twin, so that means it's a lot cheaper to build than a four-cylinder machine. And it's worth pointing out that the Japanese are coming under pressure from a new generation of Chinese motorcycles, which are much, much more competitive than they were previously. And so that's become important. They have to compete on price. A twin's lighter. Keeping the weight of a Super Sports 4 down actually required paring down other components, and that of course costs more. It's also a bit narrower, and that means a bit less power is actually needed to push the bike through the air on the way to its top speed. So the latest MT-07 produces 74 horsepower. That's way down on the last batch of the 600 Super Sports bikes, so it's not so far off the original CBR 600F, which was around 82 horsepower, if I remember correctly. And that was still capable of nudging 130. That's one of the advantages of using aerodynamics. So I can't imagine that an MT-07 with a full sort of fairing would be that much slower. And for real world purposes, twins tend to produce better drive at lower revs, which is where the engine sits when you're riding on the road. We're not always chasing top speed. And something of the clincher is that the MT-07 itself has become a base for some platform engineering. Now, this is something I mentioned on a number of occasions, but the classic example here is the NC 700-750 range. That underlying chassis and engine were designed specifically to allow bolt-on clothing, as it were, to produce everything from a scooter to an adventure bike. The MT-07 already has the Tracer 7 and the Tenere 700 variants, so it doesn't take a turbocharged crystal ball to see an R model in the pipeline. So, and that is what it could look like, and quite nice it looks too. I wouldn't mind one of those, but I'd really like it if they did a sort of a faired sit-up version, a bit like my old Hornet or the XJ6. And my guess is you might just see one of those return too. Okay, so moving down a notch from a full power A category license, the Driver and Vehicle Standards Agency, DVSA, as you probably know them, have opened a consultation to gain views on reducing the minimum capacity of motorcycles used for the A2 bike test. Currently it sits at 395, and they are considering reducing it to 245. And it's just one of a bunch of changes to driving tests that would also affect cars, vans, lorries, and minibuses. So there's a wide-ranging sort of rethink going on. So why would the DVSA want to reduce the size of the test motorcycle? The answer to this is that they say it's due to the increasing use of A2 motorcycles in the urban and commuting role. And of course, what they didn't say is the fact that younger riders don't have any choice. They're restricted to an A2 motorcycle. But what the consultation noted is that there are now many smaller capacity bikes which have actually been built to fit the A2 license. Previously, when the rules came in, there was virtually nothing in this sort of 250, 300, 400 cc class which fitted the A2 license. Virtually the only bikes you could buy were actually power restricted bigger machines. So the 395 capacity limit prevents people taking on their test on bikes that they might actually go on to ride later. As the vast majority of trainees take the test on school bikes, schools are, for the sake of simplicity, often choosing a 600, something like my XJ6 Diversion, or a 700 like the MT-07 that we've just seen, which are suitable for the category A license, the full power license. But what most people don't realize is that you can get plug-in restrictors for these things, which basically you drop into the wiring loom into a socket, and they drop the power output straight down to the required sort of 46.6 35 kilowatt level, which basically makes the one bike dual purpose. It means the training school can just plug in and plug out this unit depending on what they want the bike for. Now, obviously, that means that the school can cut costs by only using one bike for training. But the drawback is that those larger machines are heavier and larger than the smaller A2 machine. My XJ6 is not a light beast, and it also has a sort of fairly high seat height. So the DVSA have said that reducing the size of the motorcycle, I mean the engine capacity here, acknowledges the changes in engine capabilities and power output. But basically what they're saying, they say many people would find the lighter 250cc models of motorcycle much more suitable for them. So this is an astonishing piece of forward thinking by DVSA. To me, it makes perfect sense. I'm sure most training schools will get hold of at least one or two of these smaller 250 sort of 300cc machines. They're not just cheaper to buy, they're cheaper to run. As they weigh less, they are more manageable for smaller riders, those with shorter legs, which means particularly women riders. And that means all these riders can be accommodated without having to do the modifications which are sometimes necessary to the bigger bikes. Where you lowering the seats by cutting some of the foam out, which makes them bloody uncomfortable in my experience, and also modifying the suspension, which also can compromise the bike a bit. So yeah, with a purpose-built bike of the right kind of physical size, that makes a lot of sense to me. However, the DVSA are also in cloud cuckoo land, because they say it could also encourage more people to upgrade from an A1 category motorcycle. That's the basic 11 kilowatt 125 that you can ride on an L plate. After their compulsory basic training, they might then feel comfortable and safe enough to upgrade to a 250cc or slightly larger model. My response to that is to suggest they ask themselves a very simple question: which riders are actually stuck on a 125 after CBT? Well, of course, it's the youngsters, it's the youngest riders. They're not old enough to go for an A2 license, so there's no encouragement, there's no drive for these riders to get up to a bigger bike, because they simply cannot do so. So basically what they do is they get a CBT, no point paying for a test to ride what they're already riding on a CBT, so they don't get a test, and they're riding around, in my opinion, partially trained. So a better option might be to take that test on the 125 and then get an upgrade to a speed or power limited 250, say 25 horsepower or 80 miles an hour, something like that. So you would get some benefit from moving up a notch and taking a test on a 125, and that would get people off a CBT and get some decent training to a test standard, which is the standard that we are supposed to be at when we ride on the roads. One final comment: you may be wondering why the DFT DVSA are actually looking at changing the system, because it's rare that they like to make things actually easier or cheaper for trainers or test candidates, and it's apparently being driven by the government policy to make changes that relax regulations wherever possible. Of course, if they really wanted to, they could ditch the test requirement to move between the A1, A2 and A license categories. The EU license proposals, and this is not well known, always offered the option of a training course with a certificated and approved instructor to move up to the next level. There was never an absolute requirement within the EU proposals to take a test. That was purely and simply a UK government choice. Anyway, if you do want to talk to the DVSA about this, the consultation is open till the 22nd of March. Okay. Nick has also looked in, and Nigel has appeared. Hello to the two of you. Nigel's already said the state of the potholed roads, the finished sports bikes, Enfield Himalayan. Anyone? Yes, well, yeah, as I said the other day, when you can find a hugger from Pyramid Products for Enfield, you begin to get the idea that, in fact, these bikes are going mainstream. So don't forget, you're tuned in to Elevenses with Kevin Williams here. You can catch up with this show on Wednesdays and Sundays at 11 a.m. It is here on Facebook Live, so you can watch it anytime on Facebook, or you can head over to my YouTube channel, Survival Skills UK. Don't forget the all-important UK on the end of it, or you will find someone showing you how to sharpen a knife with a leather belt or something. And you can watch the old shows over there. And that's, yeah, there'll be a reason. I'll mention that in just a moment. All right, okay. Now, moving down a notch from category A to A2. I actually had a chance to ride an A2 machine a couple of years ago. About this time, in fact, I was over in California. I was visiting my brother and his family, and I took the opportunity to go out for a day's riding with him on a rented R3 Yamaha. Now, I got hold of the bike from a company called Eagle Rider, who've been bombarding me with invitations to travel back to the US and rent a Harley, which I can't say I have much intention of doing. But they have just announced a tie-up with Zero Motorcycles, and that means they are the first company to offer a network of electric bike rentals. Eagle Rider are likely to be the largest motorcycle rental fleet in the world. They certainly say they are. And they will begin this rollout of Zeros in 7 different cities in the US. And the rollout began on Tuesday, and you should be able to find them in Las Vegas, Nevada, San Francisco, and Los Angeles, both in California, Phoenix in Arizona, and Miami in Florida. Arthur Peterson, fleet director for Eagle Rider, was quoted as saying, "For nearly 30 years, Eagle Rider has been setting the standard in how motorcycle rentals and touring should be done, and has always offered the finest selection of American and international brands to riders the world over. Adding Zero to our premium model line means we can confidently say we'll be offering the best electric motorcycles available as part of our fleet selection as well." Now, Zero clearly see this not just as a chance to shift bikes into the rental market, but also give potential buyers, many of whom still have fairly cold feet about shifting away from a petrol engine two-wheeler, a chance to take what would be basically an extended test ride on these bikes. Mike Cunningham, who's the Vice President of Sales for the Americas for Zero Motorcycles, he said, "The riding experience of a Zero is fundamentally different from that of any other motorcycle, especially a gas-powered one. But the ownership of an EV is materially different as well. Taking a Zero home and living with it for a few days may seem just an extended demo ride, but the impact of the experience on riders is significant." And I suspect, it probably will encourage a few people who would otherwise dig their heels in and say, "No, not going to ride an electric motorcycle." I expect a few people will take one out for a day, maybe a few days. Maybe they will actually realize that electric motorcycles are damn good fun and surprisingly competent as motorcycles as well. Zeros, I rode a couple of Zeros a couple of years ago and thoroughly enjoyed the experience. The range is still a touch and go issue, but they are getting there. Anyway, to back this up, the link up does give potential buyers an incentive. If you do go on to buy a new bike from Zero, you'll get a discount of up to £300. $300, I should say, basically, if that's what you spent on rental. So, okay, if you want more information on the rental locations, you can find it on the Zero website. And I do have a link for you here. Let me just up for you. There we go. You can go and have a look at that. If you're over in the States at any time, it might be worth spending a day renting a Zero. Right, okay. Please say that potential purchasers of bike clothing are going to get some decent advice, and as they work their way around the latest PPE, personal protective equipment regulations, which will help them find clothing best suited to their needs. Now, if I can get the right button clicked, there we go. I got that one clicked, so I just need to click that one. Paul Valnsbury, of who you may know, appears on this show from time to time. Paul's here this morning. Paul's teamed up with FEMA, the Federation of European Motorcycle Associations, to offer some expert advice on motorcycle clothing. You may remember that I ran a series of interviews with experts on clothing back during the first hard lockdown last year, and one of those talks was with Paul. If you haven't seen it, it is actually worth reviewing. There are a couple of other talks as well with Dr. Chris Hurren, who's out in Australia, and his hobby is destroying clothing to find out how good or bad it is. And he set up a rating system as well, which is independent of CE, but it's interesting to go along and look to see how clothing performs. And I also talked to Kate Jennings of Hideout Leather about how her company makes leathers to a high standard. So what's happening in the world at the moment is that the old non-CE approved clothing may possibly still be found on rails in shops, but basically all the new ranges have had to be CE certified for quite some time now, and all that should be filtering down the supply chain. And it's likely that most of the kit that you find on the hangers in the shop now is actually CE approved. But as Paul points out, policing the clothing that's sold online, particularly when it's sourced outside the UK and the EU, is actually much tougher. Now, the advice on the page is relatively straightforward and easy to read. It does give you a handy bullet list, actually, of things to look out for. Let me just put that up for you. You should be able to read that just about. What it says is, watch out for misleading texts in the items description. Watch out for false CE approval claims. Only buy items that are genuinely CE approved and come with the right documents. When in doubt, and when COVID-19 circumstances allow, visit your local motorcycle shop that sells protective motorcycle clothing and get some good advice and explanation before you spend your hard-earned cash. Now, can't argue with that. Paul's advice basically on the page is clear and straightforward. And if you're in the market for new kit when we get back on the bikes, and I suspect that there will be a few of us who may have added the odd centimetre or so around the tum. Astonishingly, I've gone the other way. I've actually lost weight, which is a bonus. But head out to the shop, but make sure that you've bookmarked the FEMA page. And once again, I'm just going to give you the link to that. Here it is, here it comes. And if you have a look on that page, you'll also find a link to Paul's own LinkedIn page. And that's worth keeping an eye on, because Paul actually does give some interesting coverage of items of clothing on his page there. So that's Paul Valnsbury and FEMA working together to try to make life just a little bit clearer in mind for us when we come to buy motorcycle kit. Right, okay. So with that in mind, there's marketing speak, and there's sometimes what I consider to be pseudoscience. And sadly, the problem with pseudoscience is that it's still legal. Last week, I was pointed in the direction of an advert for Klim jackets, which seems to have been drawn from a press release, because I found exactly the same formula of words on another seller's site, which started with the expression, safety starts with being seen. Right, okay, no argument with that at all. If we're not seen, we're at risk. And after all, big chunk of my science of being seen presentation is all about explaining why motorcyclists sometimes aren't seen. Fast and clear recognizability is a primary safety factor regardless of what time of year. Well, okay, that's another of the important conclusions that science of being seen draws. Is that not that we're just seen, but we actually need to be recognized. People need to know what it was they saw and to identify it as a motorcycle and rider. So how do we achieve that? Well, if we go over to Klim, they say that the shape and arrangement of reflectors on Klim-made products are chosen to ensure the wearer is immediately detected and noticed as a motorcyclist. Klim exclusively use high-quality 3M Scotch-Light reflectors, properties of which have proved themselves over many years. And further down the list of features, what you'll find is 3M Scotch-Light reflectors with biomotion recognition. Right, biomotion. Everything up to that point I've had no arguments with, but as soon as they used the word biomotion, the alarm bells rang. Because the clue is in the name. What do you think biomotion recognition requires to work? It requires motion. Reflectors or lights down arms and legs are quite effective if they create a silhouette, because then you get the outline of a human being. And that's why solid colored jackets are great, because basically what they do is they create the silhouette of a person. So if you happen to be sitting on a bike and you have a full jacket with sleeves and a helmet of the same kind of color, then people can see that it's a person in front of them. When you add reflectors or lights down arms and legs for a pedestrian, then you get something rather different. You actually get the impression of movement, and that is what they're referring to here with this term biomotion recognition. And it is known that if you can get those lit up areas moving in the shape of a walking person, you can increase the detection of a pedestrian significantly at night time. And although I haven't actually seen any studies on this, I would guess that probably reflectors on pedals and cycle shoes can do the same with the sort of the up and down movement that you'll get. That'll pull attention towards the cycle, and people will realize that they're actually looking at the feet of a cyclist. But think about the rider sat on top of the bike. Stationary, you're not moving around. There is no such thing as biomotion for a rider on top of a motorcycle. And then have a look at just where the patches are. Let me bring this back up again. There we go. We should be able to see that. This is their Hardanger one-piece suit. And look where the high-vis colours are, and if you look very carefully, you'll see little blobs, little stripes of reflective material. None of this actually creates the outline of a rider. What you actually get is mostly grey with occasional bits of bright yellow on it, and even smaller reflective features. So in terms of making sure that the rider is immediately detected and noticed as a motorcyclist, I would say that the design of this garment, it will be totally ineffective. Now, let's be fair, Klim have a reputation for very high quality clothing, and I actually have my eye on this one-piece suit, which is apparently due for release at some time in the not too distant future, although it is a fairly eye-watering $1,300. But frankly, I feel that making dubious claims like this, legal though they might be, is dressing marketing speak up in sciencey sounding language, and doesn't do Klim or us any favors. So, all right, okay, not too happy with that one. Whilst I'm on the topic of rants, have a look at this diagram. Now, I rarely spend much time on Twitter because I do find the soundbite nature of the platform very irritating. And what it allows people to do is make statements which sound meaningful but actually turn out to be rather less. So what happened here was I got shown a tweet saying, this stat on the percentage of drivers exceeding 30-mile-per-hour speed limits over 50% and rising to 70% during the COVID lockdown is staggering. Now, okay, it sounds awful, doesn't it? Yeah, 70% of drivers exceeding the speed limit. limits. And basically it was presented with this graph. Now what the graph shows, if you look at it closely, is it shows the proportion of vehicles exceeding the speed limit on 30-mile-per-hour roads before and after lockdown. Now, if you have a cursory glance, you'll see what appears to be a big peak in the orange line representing speeding during lockdown. The writer continues, the proportion of cars exceeding the speed limit during the UK coronavirus lockdown was higher than for the equivalent period during 2019. And 2019 is represented by the blue line. And you can see, as soon as you compare the two, the big jump in 2020 for lockdown. But look sideways and you'll see a scale is set on the graph. And once you look at the scale, you'll see that, in fact, in the previous year, 2019, between 50 and 60% of vehicles were actually exceeding the 30 speed limit already before lockdown. And so when the early weeks of the year are compared, they coincide fairly well. There's virtually no difference between 2019 and the first couple of months of 2020. But as soon as we go into lockdown, yes, there is an increase in speeding vehicles, but it's not a 70% increase. Given that around 50 to 60% of drivers are already exceeding the speed limit, you've got a 10% increase on top of that. So the full increase is sort of more in the region of 5 or 6%. So staggering is actually quite a small rise when you actually put it into context with what drivers were already doing. And the other thing is, by how much were they speeding? Well, that's something we're not told. If what we're doing is measuring cars traveling at 31 miles per hour in a 30 limit, that's a very different situation from freeing up a gridlock road where traffic was previously creeping on at 15 miles an hour. Drivers suddenly find they can do 50 or 60 down it. And in fact, when you dig into the data, what it turns out is that the vast majority of these speeding cars were actually traveling between 30 and 35 miles per hour. Around 25% of drivers were traveling at over 35, but very few topped 50. So what that means basically is that the majority of the speed infractions were less than 10%. Okay, and where did the data come from? Was it national? Well, it turns out not. Although it came from the DFT's automatic traffic counters, the sites that they picked were chosen to exclude locations, it says, where external factors might restrict driver behaviour. And they go on to reference junctions, hills, sharp bends, and, wait for it, speed cameras. So in other words, what they did was they specifically picked bits of free-flowing road where they already knew vehicles were speeding, were exceeding the speed limit, and they chose those to highlight this alleged staggering increase in speeding. Just for good measure, the report, which is actually called Vehicle Speed Compliance Statistics Great Britain January to June 2020, also says it's providing estimates of compliance. Now, what does that mean? Either they have the data or they don't. It can't be an estimate. It's either real or it isn't. And if it's not real, it's an educated guess. Now, nothing I've said here means that I agree with speeding. But what it does show is that it's very, very easy to produce a skewed viewpoint by looking at data. And in this case, you're creating something of a storm in a teacup. Right, I've already overrun by 5 minutes. I was going to talk about motorcycles and junctions, but I think I will hold that one over for another show. Right, I trust you've enjoyed today's episode of Elevenses. Don't forget, if you want something to read, you can find, that was the wrong one, that was the one I meant to put up. You can head over to my survival skills page at lulu.com and you can find my paperbacks over there. Look out for special offers on those. And if you also want more reading, you can also head over to my coffee.com page, where you will find that I've finished putting up tips on Tuesday for 2017. I'm now putting up the skills on Saturday posts for that year, which basically means you've got around 100 posts for 2014, another 100 for 215, another 100 for 2016, and something over 50 for 2017 articles on better biking to read. So there's loads and loads and loads of content over there, and you can access it for just £3 a month. So go over there, support me and my work, and help me come back with yet more good biking articles for you. Thanks for watching today. Stay safe and stay careful out there on the bikes. There is light at the end of the tunnel. There is talk that we may finally be approaching the end of lockdown at some point in the not too distant future. So I hope we'll see you again for the next show. Bye for now.